So how do people even get paid to do research? I think the short answer is very easy. We get paid every 2 weeks. But the long answer is a little bit more complicated, and I want to talk about that. And I think I'm uniquely qualified to talk about that. Not only do I study research and development and innovation. I've studied it for 20 years. I live the game. I'm part of it. I talk about that all of the time. Um, and I think, being a professor of innovation, I think I'm pretty unique in terms of being able to answer this. I don't think there's maybe not nearly as many people that can answer this better than I can. So there's two broad ways to look at this. So the first one is in industry, the central thing that drives economic performance. We know this at this moment. It's pretty well established. I haven't seen too many competing arguments against that. Um, is knowledge and access to knowledge and the sharing of knowledge that happens. And what ends up happening is that the knowledge engine of most companies is the research and development that occurs. Now that is a very, very simplified version of it. Research and development can happen in many areas. It's not just like a department that does it, but many companies have a dedicated department that actually just does that. They are exploring new recipes. They're looking at different things and seeing if it's actually viable. Most large companies have a research and development arm that does research. And to the degree of how much and to what extent it really is a function of the company. But we know there is a trade-off that often happens. This trade-off is, and I learned this many years ago when I was actually doing co-op. I did all of my co-op internships. I went to the University of Waterloo. They have a great program for co-op internships. So you get exposed to companies all over the world. And every single one, and except for the first couple that I was in, was about research and development. And one of the things that some of the first people tell me is they're the first ones to let go whenever there is some sort of financial problems that happen. And the truth is, it's absolutely true because there is this trade-off that happens where you are looking for long-term gains. And the only way that you can get long-term gains is investing in knowledge and new knowledge. But at the same time, it's wasteful and costly and just a sheer penalty in the immediate term. So the best way to stay profitable is always to focus on your sales. Um, in the immediate term, this erodes greatly at your potential in the long term because you're really focused on the immediate term. You don't see the long-term benefit of what you're actually doing. So eventually those companies that sort of take that part out of it, and it's really complicated in terms of how, that might look like. But those people that take all of the sort of access to knowledge out of what they actually do, they may not perform nearly as much as well in the long term. And then they may have um, problems in the long term that are very difficult to deal with. So that is the company side. So yes, most companies, large companies, do research and development. There is different flavors of what that means. Most of the large tech companies hire a lot of people that do research and development and of various different degrees and skills and they do all sorts of interesting things for sort of discovery. But this is true of most sectors that exist. Now, I was in manufacturing early on when I was doing my co-ops many years ago, and they all did research and development too. Now, on the other side, you might think about academia as a little bit more challenging, right? And there's all these sort of pressures. So academia, I'm going to say universities and colleges. But most of the research happens in major universities for for countries, when they decide to do this, they have research labs. Many countries have specific, usually related to the military, research labs all around the world. And then they also do a lot of research just for public benefit in universities. And it's, to one degree, it's kind of bragging rights for the universities, right? Like the universities and the countries that they're in get bragging rights that we invented this, or this was where that started. And those bragging rights are fantastic. And it's sort of part of marketing that they can do. But it is, if you think about what is the generation of economic prosperity, it's the generation of knowledge and application of this knowledge. We don't really know how that, I mean, I could break it down into many different levels, and we know a fair bit, but there is still a little bit of mystery to all of this and how this it sort of translates. It's not as direct as one would hope, but that's okay because we're looking. Usually, when states or provinces or countries invest in their universities, they're looking for a long-term play. And so they're looking for invention, for innovation to happen, um, and for knowledge creation to happen in their location. But it's an investment that's 30 to 50 to 100 years out. So bragging rights matter. They get marketing. People want to go to a place where there's lots of interesting things that are happening. That's just, that's what people do. But it also creates an engine to build off of if you're doing it correctly, right? If you have the right infrastructure, you have the right players, like the quickest way to kill any of this stuff in a university system is to have a bunch of, self-centered people that are condescending. That's going to kill things. But if you have a lot of openness and encouragement, it creates a system over the long run, not the immediate run. This is a challenge. It's a medium run play or a long run play. And that's why sort of those personalities don't work very well, because in the short term they get things done, but in the long term they often are very detrimental. Um, in the long run, over time, it becomes very attractive, but it also creates a soup, a primordial soup that generates new knowledge. Now, how do you get paid? Right? Like that's the key thing. I get paid. So it's a little complicated in terms of mechanisms of how this all works. So usually the state or the province, wherever you are, the country will designate some money towards research and development. And they have what are called different lines. These different lines are allocated to different people. And at least in most of the Western countries, they now have a system that is similar to the American tenure system. The American tenure system was high. It was a big success, despite what some people may not think about it. But it was a really big success, and a lot of countries have copied it. Now, what happens is that you get this line that's allocated by the province, and that line pays for somebody to do research. Now, a portion, they may divvy that out in terms of how much and when they get paid, but they also will get access to pools of money that the government, either federal or state government, allocates, and they have a competitive process. These are called grants, and you can get access to those. In my field, grants are less popular, but typical science is you get access to these grants, and that those grants allow you to do sort of things that are not related to your salary. Now, what happens in those moments when you don't get a grant, or there is financial challenges that the state or the province is running into? or sometimes politics plays a role because it's funded by states and provinces. Well, what ends up happening is that you may have to pay for some of that out of your own pocket because you're making an investment on the other side into your career. And it's challenging because we don't know. Here's the big challenge for everybody. Nobody really knows how much you should invest in one particular domain, and you don't know what is going to become popular and what is not. The most beautiful example I think is most well known is the reason why Macintosh computers or Mac became so successful, or one of the prominent reasons why it became so successful that everybody uses today, is because Steve Jobs took a course in calligraphy. Now, it has nothing to do with computer science or anything like that, but he just loved the beauty of calligraphy. And they brought that in as a feature called fonts into computers. And at the time, that was like a blow your mind kind of thing. It was like so cool that there was these fonts that you can use. And that became a driving factor why people actually bought the Macintosh computer. So you can see it's a little complicated in terms of, if we didn't invest in calligraphy or language, we wouldn't have known, or that wouldn't have happened. So it's definitely complicated. So long story short, how do people get access to these funds? It is highly competitive because there's lots of people that think that this is a wonderful career and they want to compete to get into it. And so there's what is called entry barriers to get in. You need a large amount of education. These entry barriers appear, at least at face value, to be increasing over time. It's harder and harder to get into. And so you need more and more knowledge over time. This is the nature of it. I think some of these things will change. I think part of it, we've underinvested for a very long time in research and development in many places around the world. And many of these places, as economic prosperity increases, we're going to start seeing a dramatic shift in the value of some of these positions as these countries get better and better. Places like Taiwan, for example, or the Philippines, where there's tremendous amount of talented individuals that are leaving those countries to get the skills required to do research and development, and they're not coming back. Now, this is changing, and I think it's changing rather rapidly, and we will see a dramatic shift over the next few decades in terms of the demand for this. It's going to take a long time, but there will be a shift. I'll be old and gray and crusty at that moment. And I'm already old and gray and crusty, but I'm going to be even more so. So that's how you get paid in research. All right. Take care. Have a wonderful day.